In the 1st century BC, a violent storm sunk a merchant ship full of ancient Greek artifacts just off the small island of Antikythera. "2,000 years later, the wreck was discovered by Greek sponge divers who recovered a hoard of treasures. And they also found an undistinguished corroded lump about the size of a large dictionary. It turned out to be by far the most complex piece of engineering from the ancient world. It is now called the Antikythera mechanism and is often referred to as the world's first computer.
This mechanism it's an instrument of mathematical astronomy. It's intensely rich in mathematics. It's not complicated mathematics, it's simple arithmetic and it's simple geometry, but put together in an absolutely beautiful way.
As a child, I learnt about the mechanism and I was absolutely fascinated by it. And I often wondered how researchers, scientists ever got to work on something so remarkable.
Only a third of the original mechanism survives, and it is split into 82 fragments. It is a fiendishly complex 3D jigsaw puzzle, and scientists have been struggling for more than a century to put it all back together. The back of the mechanism has been solved by previous research. A team at UCL has now published a radical paper in Nature's Scientific Reports, which announces a new model of the front of the Antikythera mechanism, where much of the physical evidence is missing.
This new paper brings together many ideas from the past, but it puts them forwards in a synthesis which shows an absolutely dazzling display of the ancient Greek cosmos, how they saw the planets, the moon and the sun.
The UCL team are now building a physical model to check the integrity of the theoretical design in their paper.
One of the things about the mechanism that remains to be done is to construct it in a way in which we believed the ancient Greeks would have constructed it. I think this is something that has been missing from the scholarship.
To solve the front of the mechanism, UCL put together an impressive range of the necessary scholarship. David Higgin, a PhD student on the project, works here at Frodshams. He is a highly skilled horologist, a clock and watchmaker. The project was inspired by Tony Freeth, a mathematician, who has studied the Antikythera mechanism for 20 years. Academic lead on the project is Adam Wojcik. He's a materials scientist with a long-term enthusiasm for archaeology and the classics. Mirto Georgakopoulou is a distinguished archaeometallurgist focusing on early metal technology. Lindsay MacDonald is an expert in imaging science, and he has edited 8 books on its application to cultural heritage. Ares Dakanalis has a background as a physicist with a long-term involvement in ancient technology and ancient astronomy. The challenge for the multidisciplinary team from UCL was to crack the difficult conundrum of the front of the mechanism, to create the first model that matches all the evidence. Their latest paper brings crucial new ideas to solve this puzzle, but it also has roots in more than 100 years of previous research. The first person to make significant progress at the beginning of the 20th century was a German philologist, Albert Rehm. He realized that it was an astronomical calculating machine, a groundbreaking idea. He proposed that it included all 5 planets known in the ancient world. With remarkable prescience, he suggested that these planets were displayed in a ring system at the front.
But he didn't have enough evidence, and he couldn't resolve what evidence he did have into a coherent mechanical structure. And what he proposed was all wrong.
50 years later, a great British researcher, Derek de Solla Price, made much further progress. He commissioned X-rays from renowned radiologist Charalambos Karakalos. To their astonishment, they found 30 intermeshing gears, nearly all incomplete, but enabling estimates of the all-important tooth counts of the gears. The puzzle had become an order of magnitude more complex. Price found an ancient Babylonian 19-year cycle of the moon embedded in the gearing, but nearly everything else he got wrong. Price's great achievement was to put the fragments into a coherent structure and to create a model whose outward design the UCL team have adopted. But the mechanical systems inside the new UCL model are almost entirely different. Price suggested that the planets might have been included, but without any real detail.
There was, in 2002, a revolutionary paper came out by Michael Wright, which really attempted to show how the planets might have all been included and proposed gearing to do all of that. It was a remarkable tour de force.
There was a pattern of pillars on this wheel. It had structure, some sort of structure that revolved like a merry-go-round. And what I ended up with was models of the planets. This is a model of the Greek cosmos, geocentric. You can think of this cover plate in the middle as representing the Earth, and everything goes round it.
When I first saw this model, I was quite shocked by it. I thought, is this plausible in ancient Greek technology? But over the years, I've come to think that Wright's basic architecture is correct, that this is how it must have been displayed.
Michael Wright has been one of the great pioneers of Antikythera research and has made many important discoveries. He has a unique way of working directly in the metal, often without theoretical designs. The UCL team accept Wright's coaxial output design, but the evidence has forced them to challenge most of Wright's cosmos gearing and display. To test their new ideas, the team are now following in Wright's footsteps by turning their theoretical model into a physical model.
Fundamentally, once we've gone beyond this prototype, if you like, what we then have to do is start making it in the way that we believe the ancient Greeks would have done.
The team's theoretical model is the subject of the paper, and it relies on a meticulous study of all the available evidence. Tiny features at the millimetre level can have far-reaching consequences.
In 2005, a group which I was a core part of carried out new scientific investigations of the Antikythera mechanism fragments, the surviving fragments, and in particular we did high-resolution 3D X-rays of these fragments.
The results were spectacular.
It led to a solution of the back of the mechanism, where there's much more evidence still surviving. But what was at the front was still pretty much a mystery. But what the X-rays also showed was that hidden inside some of these fragments, with 3D X-rays you can look at individual slices through the fragments, we could see new text characters, many thousands of new text characters. This was extremely exciting, a very important source of information. And some of these X-rays showed that there was an inscription on the back cover of the mechanism. The mechanism had a dial system and covers front and back. On the back cover of the mechanism, it actually describes the planets being displayed in a ring system, just as Albert Rehm had imagined.
Some of the back cover inscription is preserved in fragment B. You can just make out some text, but it is in mirror writing, a remarkable imprint from the original plate now disappeared. A mirror of fragment B shows the text the right way round. X-ray slices reveal much more text, including parts of the names of all 5 planets. Stillborn is Mercury, Phosphorus is Venus, Pyrois is Mars, Phaethon is Jupiter, and Phaenon is Saturn. This inscription is part of a user guide on the back cover, explaining how the mechanism worked and how it displayed the planets. This was crucial information for the team's reconstruction.
Really, we couldn't get round that this must have been the way it was portrayed. So all the previous models, which Michael Wright's was one, I made one in collaboration with Alexander Jones, all of these had pointers.
But these models failed to match the description. The challenge for the UCL team was to show that a ring system could be designed. There was a serious clash with the mechanics of the lunar phase device at the centre. The central output carries the variable motion of the moon against the stars. It turns a device that shows the phase of the moon on a small semi-silvered ball. To calculate phase, rotations of both moon and sun are needed. With a ring system of outputs, it seemed mechanically impossible to input the accurate true sun with its variable motion. But the UCL team found a nice solution. On one of the spokes there is a block, pierced for an attachment, which had never been understood. The team realized that this block could transmit the mean sun to the moon phase device, this mean sun being accurate enough for this purpose. This key idea enabled a ring system of outputs for the cosmos. But to start building, they needed to understand how the planets were seen in the ancient world. For the Greek astronomers who made the Antikythera mechanism, everything was made more complex by their wrong belief that the sun and planets move around the Earth. The stars remain fixed relative to each other. The sun and moon move against the stars in a regular way, but the planets were a serious problem because of their mysterious movements against the background of the stars.
They go forwards in so-called prograde motion. They reach a stationary point where they stand still, then they go backwards in a little loop, and then in retrograde motion, then they go forwards again. And the ancient Greeks, they had no understanding of what the underlying cause of this was. The underlying cause was that they believed that the planets went round the Earth. Now we know the planets go around the sun. So the ancient astronomers had to struggle with this really hard problem of the planets.
The ancient Babylonians observed the sky throughout the first millennium BC. They recorded daily astronomical observations on clay tablets. These were the basis of an advanced mathematical astronomy. The key for planetary prediction was to identify their underlying cycles.
For Venus, they had a cycle that Venus goes through 5 of these so-called synodic periods, these cycles of prograde, retrograde motion, stationary points in 8 years. And this was the basis for all subsequent attempts to predict the positions of the planets. But the ancient Greeks had a very nice geometric intuition about the planets, and that was that you could explain their motion as the simple sum of 2 circular motions, where one circular motion is mounted on the other, which produce so-called epicyclic motions. This is, they produce these loopy type motions, which is what, from the Earth, the planets actually look like. There was this quite extraordinary leap in thinking which said, well, we can have these theories, but it's kind of hard to calculate the positions from these theories. But we could make a machine to do this with toothed gear wheels. And The extraordinary thing is that Greek sponge divers found this lump of material that contains all these little gear wheels. It's only possible to interpret it as a calculating machine. A quite stunning leap forward in the history of technology, an intuition of really remarkable consequences.
Before the team could reconstruct the gear trains, they needed to understand the astronomical cycles built into the mechanism. Fragment G is the remains of the front cover, which protected the front display. It is covered in text, which is impossible to read. Slices through the 3D X-rays reveal text fragments that can be assembled into the surviving inscription. It is a formulaic list of the planets with numbers, specifying intervals in days between events in their synodic cycles. The inscription is divided into sections for each planet, in the same cosmological order as the planets in the back cover inscription.
In 2016, a professor called Alexander Jones made a remarkable discovery in this front cover inscription. And in the Venus section, he found the number 462, and in the Saturn section, he now found the number 442. And these were utterly astonishing numbers. Nobody had seen them in ancient astronomy anywhere, either ancient Babylon or ancient Greece.
Jones identified these as very accurate cycles of Venus and Saturn. The presence of these numbers meant that they must have been incorporated into the gears of the Antikythera mechanism. How were they discovered by the ancient Greeks? And what were the cycles for the other planets, where the plate was missing or too damaged to read?
Prime numbers are very critical for understanding the design of the mechanism. In fact, all the gears, what's critical about them is the prime factors that are included in the gears, which reflect the great cycles of the astronomical bodies.
How did the ancient Greeks discover the new 462-year period for Venus and 442-year period for Saturn? Previous attempts had found methods for Venus, but they failed for Saturn. The team found an original solution, based on an idea by the philosopher Parmenides of Elea, and described in a dialogue by Plato. Ancient astronomers knew of 2 periods for Venus. 5 synodic cycles in 8 years has small enough factors, but is very inaccurate. 720 synodic cycles in 1,151 years is unfactorizable. The basic idea, inspired by Parmenides, was to add known cycles to get better ones in an iterative process. The first iteration is no good because the numbers cannot be factorized into small primes. To get the second iteration, we add both seed periods to the new cycle. The first addition is no good, but success with the second, which is exactly 5 times the cycle of Venus from the back cover, so equivalent to it. The Parmenides process also works for Saturn to get the 442-year cycle from the back cover, and Parmenides succeeds for all the other planets, often with multiple choices. How do we choose? The trail of the prime numbers reveals the solution. Throughout the mechanism, gears are shared between functions to economize on the number of gears. For example, a surviving gear with the prime number 223 teeth is shared between eclipse prediction and the variable motion of the moon. No need to cut 2 separate gears. To share gears, planetary mechanisms need shared prime factors. This idea enables us to choose cycles for Mercury and Venus with the shared prime 17, and cycles for Mars, Jupiter and Saturn with the shared prime 7, meaning great economies in the number of gears. The team was now confident that they knew all the planetary cycles built into the mechanism. They were faced with highly fragmentary data. Most of the gears at the front are missing. Though the main drive wheel, shows clear evidence of a complex system of gears mounted on bearings on the spokes. There are also pillars on the periphery, near the input crown gear. The X-rays reveal that the pillars had shoulders and are pierced for attachment pins. They also show that originally there were 4 short and 4 long pillars. There must have been a rectangular plate on the short pillars and a circular plate on the long pillars, with a hole in the middle for the outputs, suggesting that nearly all the gears were crammed into this space, just 25 millimeters high. This is the basic framework for the reconstruction.
Without actually making a model of it, and making one in the way that the Greeks themselves might have had access to, we won't know whether it's really feasible. So that's the next stage for me.
First, David is making a model using modern techniques.
Making it in the modern way, you give yourself the best chance that it will work. And then you make a version with hand cut, whether it's filed or chiseled teeth, and see what other problems you give yourself. The idea that there's this fine mechanical gearing for almost clock and watch type work, that is really revolutionary.
The team are exploring exactly how the ancient Greeks made their fine gear wheels. For their theoretical model, they had the framework and the astronomical cycles, but they also needed a mechanical way to model the variable motions of the planets generated by the epicyclic models. Michael Wright was the first to adopt pin and slotted follower devices to model variable motion in his planetarium model. The team used this idea for Mercury and Venus. For Venus, the team had to incorporate the 462-year period into the gearing by using the cycle's prime factors in the tooth counts of the gears. The first prime 17 goes into a gear with 51 teeth, a multiple of 17, which is fixed at the centre. 2 and 11 go into a 44-tooth gear, meshing with the central gear on the bearing in spoke C. The second factor 17 is carried by a gear with 34 teeth, fixed to the 44-tooth gear. They still needed the factors 3 and 7. They found these in an unlikely place. Fragment D, only about 4 centimeters high, looks completely nondescript, but the X-rays tell a different story. First we find a disc. Next is a gear with 63 teeth. The missing primes 3 and 7 are prime factors of 63. Disc and gear are mounted on a square hub that changes to round so that it can turn, in a bearing in a D-shaped plate. A pin on the disc engages with a slotted follower to generate the variable motion of Venus. Now, the 63-tooth gear can use its prime factors 3 and 7 to calculate the 462-year cycle of Venus. A tube transmits the variable motion of Venus. Everything is secured by the plate on the short pillars. The variable motion is carried to a ring display for Venus, here in retrograde motion before reaching a stationary point. From the back, the pin and slot mechanism can be seen reversing its effect to return Venus to prograde motion. The team's Venus gear train matches and explains the evidence. They used a similar mechanism for Mercury. They adopted Michael Wright's scheme for modelling the true Sun and an original epicyclic mechanism for displaying the line of nodes of the Moon to show eclipse possibilities. They created novel 7-gear mechanisms for Mars, Jupiter and Saturn to calculate the complex period relations from the Parmenides process, a radical departure from Wright's mechanisms for these planets. These gearing systems need to output to the front dials via a system of nested tubes that will carry rings for the planetary display. To make these with ancient Greek techniques is a really tough challenge.
I'm really intrigued by these concentric tubes. How did you go about making them?
Well, those have been done by entirely modern methods.
So how many are there? They're 8 or 9?
There's 8 with a central solid shaft.
Okay. If you've got no lathe in ancient Greece, let's say, for argument's sake, how are you going to make these tubes?
Well, that is quite a problem.
Yes.
There are... It might be possible to cast an oversized tube and then remove material from the outside edge by filing.
You're not going to be able to cast anything with that kind of wall thickness, are you?
No. Yeah. And then mounted on each of these brass collet pieces
is one of the rings.
Will be one of the rings on 4 arms.
Okay.
So that all these rings are in the same plane.
Is it a complete no-no in your view that this would have ever worked if the ancient Greeks had built it?
I don't see any reason why an ancient Greek version shouldn't work. Well, that's why we're building one.
With all the theory in place, the team could now shoehorn the whole cosmos system into the tight spaces defined by the pillars. Fixed gears, one for Mercury and Venus, the other for the nodes of the moon. The variable lunar output through the centre. Then the bar and tube for the mean sun. The nodes are turned by these gears and output tube. The initial gears for Mercury and Venus, followed by their final epicyclic gears, discs with pins attached and slotted followers. Then the circular plate for the true Sun, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, which share many gears. The eccentric axes are the foundation for the pin and slot devices, which generate the variable motions. The novel 7-gear planetary mechanisms calculate the astronomical cycles and they output via nested tubes in the centre. Finally, the output for the true Sun. Everything turns against a fixed gear with 56 teeth, which shares the prime numbers 7 between Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. Attached to the tubes, the output rings create the cosmos display for the Sun and planets. A pointer for the date for the true Sun and a double-ended pointer for the nodes of the Moon. A small gear to carry the mean Sun rotation to the Moon phase device, whose pointer shows the position of the Moon. The display exactly matches the ring description on the back cover. The planetary rings are inscribed with index letters, referencing the catalogue of synodic events on the front cover. For ancient Greece, it is a system of staggering complexity and ambition.
I'm fascinated by the Andikυθήρων mechanism because it's been such a wonderful puzzle which has thrown up quite remarkable solutions, and when you reach that solution you get this real eureka feeling. Yes, we've found out how that worked.
There is this big question, and that is, why did they stop at the Andikυθήρων mechanism? Why did they not go beyond that?